UNLV All Access Podcast, Steve Cofield. Matt Neverett is with us, one of the voices of the Rebels on radio and TV. Runner Rebels as well, not just Rebel football. So we're going to try for the next couple of months to do some more podcast, time permitting. So I'm glad Matt is available today. And the reason I wanted to do it, Matt, is that basically every day, and I think it'll slow down in a little bit, but basically every day we've got some sort of rumor or commit for UNLV football. And now the Rebel basketball season really kicks into full-time mode. It's weird, isn't it? From a vibe standpoint, I feel like the first 8-9 weeks of the basketball season, there was no rhythm. There was no consistency. We had the terrible shooting on campus, and then just a lot of time because of at least one canceled game in the preseason. But the other day against New Mexico, we're going to get to a regular slate here with hoops.
Yeah, and the Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday kind of schedule when you get into the conference portion of the year does kind of make the season go by faster. I've always noticed that, whether it's the Mountain West Conference or other conferences that have, a set more or less couple of days a week for these games, and it kind of you get into a rhythm. And I think, at least for me personally, that's always made the time go by faster. So the non-conference slate, at least for basketball, always just seems to be longer because it obviously is on the calendar, but just in terms of the feel and the vibes, and especially with, as you mentioned, how fragmented it was this year, there really was no rhythm because they played, in some unique tournaments. We were out in Malibu and then Daytona Beach, and then there was, I think, 10 to 11 days off, something like that. And they had another stretch where there was, double-digit days off in a row where they had to add that Bethesda game, A, to, get in a rhythm before conference play, and B, to get to 30 games overall in the schedule. So, yeah, all of a sudden, kind of a nice reprieve knowing exactly when the games are and being able to kind of keep track of them easily in your head.
So let's break down the New Mexico game and look ahead to the Utah State game in just a couple of minutes. So the football news is coming pretty fast and furiously, and obviously there is the Mayava news. He's landed at USC. And if you missed the early week UNLV All Access podcast, that's posted up on the Twitter account. Caleb was in, gave his reaction to Mayava and some of the early games pulling players out of the transfer portal. So there was news this morning. And keep in mind, so far they've got 2 quarterbacks out of the portal, 1 scholarship, 1 walk-on. The walk-on is a kid who's been at Southern and UAB. His name is Dylan Mayratra. I think I'm saying his name correctly. The scholarship player is Haj Malik Williams. He's from Campbell. So we're going to get to the quarterback position in a couple minutes. So far, it looks like they've mostly concentrated on shoring up more of the back end. They've brought in 3 defensive backs and then a sprinkle of offense along with the quarterback position, a receiver, a tight end, a couple of running backs. Now I think we're going to start seeing some of their efforts to bring in big boys on both sides of the line come together. So Antonio Doyle put up on his Twitter account that he has come out of the portal from Jackson State, previously at Texas A&M, where he actually got some playing time. Borderline 4-star, 3-star. I had an offer from just about everyone in the Big 12. 6'4" and 258. And I thought all year that the Rebels did what they could with the existing roster, and they're getting bigger on the defensive line, but they're still not there yet with the guys who were 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", who can naturally weigh 290 to 310. And I think they're going to start getting there. It's going to take a little while, but they did what they had to last year with some smaller guys, good players. But you're going to see a big fellow run here where they try to bring in more size.
Yeah, and I think that's imperative, especially as you had kind of mentioned, those big boys in the middle with this 3-3-5 scheme. Schematically, if you have the right guys, we saw San Diego State run it very successfully for years in the Mountain West Conference. And it is just a different kind of look on defense, but you have to have the right personnel. You've got to have the big run stopper in the middle and then a pair of good edge rushers on the outside, and that frees up a lot of the linebackers and that 5th defensive back to kind of come up and play in the run stop game. So I think, like you had mentioned, Barry Odom and his staff did a phenomenal job in year one with, I would say, for a D1 program, more guys, I would just guess by percentage, stayed at UNLV than at a lot of other programs with the first-year head coach. There were guys that were excited to play for Barry Odom. And, while 100% of them, especially more so on the defensive side of the ball, were not a great scheme fit, they did what they had to do. They were about an average to maybe just slightly below average defense in the Mountain West by the numbers last year. But the offense and the powerhouse that was the Go-Go this year kind of made up for a lot of those faults. So I think that it is really important to see them go after a lot of these high-end guys. This, the recruiting ties of Barry Odom go deeper than I think even a lot of us had thought. This guy, Antonio Doyle, that had committed today, originally committed out of high school to Barry Odom at Mizzou when he was there, and then flipped to Texas A&M. He had offers out of high school from Texas and Oklahoma, and as you had mentioned in the portal, basically every Big 12 team wanted him. So this was a highly sought-after guy in the Power 5 realm, and to come to UNLV, to have the faith in Barry Odom, especially on a defense that is going to be rebuilt. And I think so far they've done a phenomenal job just in terms of the holes that they were left with after last year, going out and filling those, especially like you had mentioned, going first after some of the splash guys in that defensive backfield, and then kind of supplementing it with the big boys now.
And the pattern, I think, is going to be the same as it was last year. So last year they wound up with 50-plus new players. They sent about 30 players into the portal. And if you remember, there was a run between coaches, right, as Arroyo was out, and they were going through the process with Odom. Their center, Lee Fountaino, decided to move on to Arizona State. Kyle Williams to Washington State, a wide receiver. Noah Williams at defensive back to Cal. Aiden Robbins eventually goes to BYU. Preston Nichols landed at Purdue. So there were about 6 guys that they lost where I'm sure they were like, damn it, we could have used those guys. Not trying to be harsh. The rest of the group, I think it was a sentiment like, hey, we appreciate what you did here, but you may be better off somewhere else, and good luck. And so far the class is kind of developing that way. There are going to be a bunch of players who went in the portal who do land somewhere. I don't know that many are going to land up. Cam Jenkins did. His brother's at Baylor, so he moved out, and obviously Jade Mayava did. So, and I think you're going to see after the spring more guys go. Spring is coming up March 2nd through April 6th. Then the portal opens back up. Yay! May 1st. And believe me, when fans look at that, Matt, fans are like, oh, my God, the portal. I can't believe it's going to open up again. I don't think coaches hate this completely, because after spring, you can see, hey, maybe these 10 guys or 12 guys aren't right for the program. And then you can pinpoint positions like, okay, we still need people in these positions. And then you can retool again.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives you the option to kind of see what you got, get the advanced look, especially with a lot of the new guys coming in. And it's just so crazy, the college football coaching schedule, and especially nowadays where you're not only recruiting basically all year long like you always were, it's doubled. You're re-recruiting your own team every single year. And, the vast majority of college football players are being recruited every single year, whether it's by their team or by another team. And correct me if I'm wrong, this second transfer window is not as long as this one, right? It's not
only 15 days. Yeah, the total days are 45. The first is 30. The second is 15. So May 1st to May 15th.
And I think with it being shorter, it's a lot more of a focused effort from the programs, from the players themselves. You really don't have time to screw around, especially after spring practice. If coming from the program and the coach's perspective, you've got 2 weeks to go after one or two maybe premier guys, and then try to poach some other guys that you have the recruiting ties with. But I don't mind the second one. I do think that there's no way that it can be just one 30 to 40 day transfer window after the season. And while I've got issue and take umbrage with certain parts of the portal itself, namely the fact that it opens up before all the games are done, it is diminishing the value and the meaning of bowl games everywhere. Not that, every single bowl game matters, but for these programs, and more so for the cities that these in the local economies that host these bowl games, they don't want to see the bowl games importance get diminished. And right. I think with the relationship with, the CFP and the NCAA, I think the NCAA needs to do whatever they can to save a lot of the relationships with these small towns, with these bowls, keep as many as they can going, because it only spreads the sport, benefits the local economies. And I think with the way that the transfer portal is now, some of the mid-tier bowls are absolutely more than diminished, because, even we saw like Florida State, they were top 6 team in the country, but because of the way that it shook out and because of the timing, their coaching staff had no shot in that game against Georgia. They could have played USF, and they might not have had a shot with that roster that they had for that game.
I'm going to say again, though, I believe for schools like UNLV, I guess until they get to like a 10-win level, and they could be losing lots of Maavas. Then it becomes a negative. But net right now, the portal is awesome. If you do your work, and you just mentioned you work your connections as a head coach, and the OC, Brennan Marion's been everywhere. They've got connection. I mean, think about Brennan Marion coached at Howard in DC and Hawaii. So he's got the entire country covered. So you see him pulling players out and you're like, wait, how did he know about Haj Malik Williams and be able to pull him out? Now, I think this one's fascinating. This weekend, there's a Yale player coming in, Clay Patterson, who is a Texas guy, Frisco, Texas. Clearly a smart guy, right? But a big fella at 6'3" and 290, and a pretty good sack artist in the Ivy League. And we know in the Ivy League, there's no fifth year. So you see a lot of the talented Ivies move on. So that'll give him a chance to get another big fella, which I think is going to be tremendous. I think they start pulling some offensive linemen, but they may even have to wait. And I keep telling people online, like this portal thing for UNLV, this goes all the way through June. Because last year, they introed players coming on to campus. I think it was around June 30th or July 1st. They put out a video, and there were like 32 guys, and they had them walk in for, a couple of seconds onto a shot. And I was like, I'm tracking. I'm like, who? What? Who? Like, it felt like they had added, and a lot of them were walk-ons, but it felt like they had added like 8 guys out of nowhere. I remember, I think it was the first week of August. I'm like, who is Javon Grigsby? Wait, Purdue. They added a Purdue defensive back. So this is going to go on for a while. And by the way, I will warn people, like we said, with the players out, they go through spring, they get to analyze, not only are they going to play, but the best players like Jonathan Baldwin, like Ricky White, will look around. I mean, Ricky's the one that's really important. If I'm Ricky White, and he seems like he's really bought in and really loyal, but you never know when offers start coming in. He's going to look at the quarterback situation, and he's going to have a decision to make, like, hey, I have these schools circling me. Do I like the quarterback situation? So even though he's pledged allegiance and he's been really supportive on social media, we don't know what happens after spring practice.
Yeah, and I think he has been more than patient. I will give Ricky White all the credit in the world for being patient with this program, for being patient with Brennan Marion, and namely mostly for being patient with Jada Maava as he worked throughout the year as a redshirt freshman playing for the first time. And I will say that if they go into, or I guess come out of spring practice with a similar situation as last year, where you've got one quarterback, that's greatly beneficial. And coming out of spring practice last year, Doug Brumfield was the guy. But then, as the year kind of developed and the injuries happened, the way that it was negotiated and handled with Jada Maava, I think a lot of receivers would have been more upset and more vocal outwardly than we saw it from anybody in the program. And I think that speaks a lot to the players buying into Brennan Marion, buying into this system, and buying into Barry Odom as a whole. And it's going to be interesting to see, because there is another quarterback recruit coming in, and we can talk about him as well, because a lot of people have him rated, and we'll get to him in a sec, the top rated FCS transfer quarterback. So I think we're going to get some resolution, whether it is Taj Malik Muhammad, whether it's Doug Brumfield. Brumfield's got one more year, right?
I think Brumfield's got 2 more years, but we talked about Doug the other day. I'm not sure about his health status, so I'm not sure if I don't know what he's going to do, because he's had a lot more injuries than people realize, and especially behind the scenes and in practice, because both of his absences the last couple of years went from maybe something that could be 2 weeks or 3 weeks to suddenly it was 6 and 7 weeks, and I think there was re-injury situations. So it seems to me the way they're recruiting. So again, they've already got Haj Malik Williams out of Campbell, who would be probably a slight leader over Brumfield because of Brumfield's health, would be the slight leader right now to start. And again, this kid's really interesting because he did some military service in terms of prep school at a high school, and then went to Campbell, was at Campbell for a long time. He's 24 years old. At the end of the season this year, he will be 25 years old. So he's a very mature kid, and I think he gets it. Like, he's coming in for a quarterback competition. They added a walk-on, and as we can see, because they have Matthew Sluka visiting from Holy Cross, clearly they want more quarterbacks in the room. I also think there may be another quarterback, at least another quarterback behind the scenes, who people may think is challenging for playing time. There may be some health issues there as well. So they look like they want to add a lot to the room. And this, I'll tell you what, this Sluka kid is really intriguing because he's another guy. He's got a lot of playing time under his belt. He was a post grad. He's a Long Island kid, which I find fascinating from me being from the New Jersey, New York area, what the connection is there. He went to post grad for a year, and then he went to Holy Cross, and then he started as a freshman at Holy Cross. I mean, let me pull up his numbers here real quick. We're talking about a guy who's already thrown for almost 6,000 yards, 59-16, 59 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. And I think the most intriguing thing is, Matt, this last year he rushed for 1,243 yards. His career, he's got 600 carries, 38 touchdowns, 3,600 yards. And I know Hajj Malik Williams has wheels, but clearly Sluka can run the ball. I've always thought that the go-go ultimately, that RPO is such an important part that you need a good decision maker and a really good downhill runner. And there's competition for Sluka. But, man, if they can land him, a guy with wheels who's got a pretty good arm, holy moly, the possibilities in this go-go.
Oh, certainly. And I mean, it's that the rushing yards number from this past season is what jumped out to me immediately when I saw the tweet that I had originally seen saying that he was coming to visit. And that was really the biggest knock on Jaden Mayava last year in terms of running this go-go system. He had some wheels. He's not a burner. I think he would tell you that. But it's about decision-making, A. B, the athleticism that you can add to that position that just adds a whole other wrinkle to that offense. And for me, the biggest thing with Mayava running that go-go was when he was in the option game and running outside the tackles, the ball security would just left a lot to be desired. I mean, it was a lot of not only, loose handling of the ball itself, but some indecision that caused some extra turnovers, especially as it got towards the end of the year. Because people forget, that they kind of leave the season with a sour taste in their mouth falling in their last 3 games. But up until that point, Mayava had not looked like a freshman. And, those were the first couple of games against some defenses that had as much tape as anybody to prepare for him. He started to look more like a freshman. And especially in my eyes, in the run game, in the option game, when the moment got really big. So if they can add a guy that in either of those two guys, A, that has the experience and is not going to let a moment be too big, and B, can run. And if in the case of Slocum, run especially well, I think that adds a huge wrinkle that wasn't necessarily there, at least in the pregame planning part of the offense.
It'll be interesting because Holy Cross is one look when it comes to school. Great academic institution, obviously FCS and Northeast kid. So there's a chance he can come to Vegas and be freaking, Sluka could be blown away, or maybe it's not for him. But the other great benefit, and I know people hate this, and they've been kind of, they're not warring with him because he's not going to respond. But I've said multiple times, I'm disappointed with the way a lot of UNLV fans have been really nasty about Mayava. I think they're downplaying how good he was. It wasn't just the system. But that said, he put up good numbers. He won. He was an award winner. Brennan Marion is a very attractive guy to play for. So if you're a quarterback and you want to get ready for the NFL, this guy is an offense whisperer, a quarterback whisperer. So it's a very attractive spot if you want to win and put up big numbers.
Well, and you and I had even talked yesterday when we were at the Kevin Kruger radio show about how attractive it is to be a running back in one of Brennan Marion's systems, because, they've got right now 3 running backs, including Jet Thomas returning, that will likely get the bulk of the carries, the lion's share of the carries. But if you're a true freshman coming in as a running back and you see what Courtney Reese or Jordan Young-Humphreys was able to do in this offense, even as the 4th and 5th guy in that system, I mean, that is attractive because at the very least you're going to give yourself an opportunity to get some touches. And that's not the case at a program like Florida or a program where it's, a one-back system. It's more reliant on the quarterback. With the way this offense is, I mean, heck, just by the numbers, where there's 2 running backs on the field at all times, they're going to need to blow more often than any other kind of system. So if you're a running back, I think it's just as, if not even more attractive to come and play for one of Brennan Marion's teams.
Yeah, they got a running back in from NC State, another one in from Central Arkansas, who I really like, and Kylan James, just based on the reception numbers, because he's had, I think, 53 and 42 receptions the last couple of years, and that wasn't something that was really a big factor in the offense. Plus 2 freshmen running backs coming in who were both 195 up to 210 pounders, so they're good sized guys. You mentioned Jet. So, again, they're going to have a loaded room, and you have a chance to be fresh all the time. If you want to get 28 touches a game, that's probably not going to happen. They're not going to wear all the tread off the tire. So tons of things to be enthusiastic about with UNLV. And I think what they've pulled out of the portal is very interesting so far. Let's flip to basketball.
Well, if you
Make your last comment. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Last thing, and it's something that I said to you yesterday as well when we were talking after the radio show. If you would have told me 5 years ago, 10 years ago that UNLV was pulling multiple SEC transfers, especially one on each side of the ball from Texas, and then you've got Arkansas, you've got NC State, you've got a former Texas A&M four-star guy. I mean, the fact that they got Xavier Carter last year out of the portal, out of LSU, just on that alone, everybody was like, That is awesome. Now you multiply that by like 4 or 5. The way that this program is just skyrocketing in the recruiting game, because they are able to take advantage of the portal more so than a lot of other facility, or I would say programs, because of the facilities and because of the allure of Vegas and the rising program. It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch, and keep an eye on that spring transfer window as well.
We should update people on Xavier Carter. He did go in the portal. He landed at Central Florida, so technically by Big 12 standards, Power 4 standards, he actually bumped up back again to Power 5, Power 4. Basketball. So big win against New Mexico. I thought they would win the game. I didn't think they would get up 21 and pretty much win comfortably down the stretch. Give me your biggest impression from that win. Obviously, a much-needed win, get some positive momentum, and also a much-needed win off the very emotional moment of seeing Jalen Hill go down.
Yeah, and it ended up being a 10-point game, and really towards the end, it wasn't that close. UNLV, once they put the foot on the gas in the second half and took over, that was that. New Mexico really didn't stand a chance. They had Jalen House all out of sorts all night. JT Toppin didn't really have the kind of performance that we're used to from him. He still got his numbers, but not the kind of dominating performance. They had Jamal Mashburn Jr. kind of out of rhythm. I think that on the defensive side of the ball, that's what I was most excited about. To hold New Mexico under 75 points is a big accomplishment. And one thing that really stood out for me is, having watched this team all year, when they were big, the Akron game, it comes to mind. They have a big lead. All of a sudden, the lead shrinks, and they kind of go into a shell and to start playing out of sorts. And we saw that a little bit to start the second half. New Mexico really had their best start to a second half, at least in Mountain West play so far. And UNLV, you're looking out at the bench, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, we've seen this one before. And then all of a sudden they completely flip the script and really hold off a supremely talented New Mexico team. I've told you since the start of the year that I was really high on this Lobo team as far as a finish in the Mountain West Conference. So for UNLV to take advantage of that game, because that's really what it was, considering the first 5 games of the schedule are probably some of the toughest of the year, to take advantage and at the very worst guarantee themselves a split against this really tough New Mexico team, I was really impressed. And we can get into the rotations, because Kevin Kruger was really excited to talk about a couple of guys who played more and played especially well, even outside of the Boone brothers, who absolutely dominated. Let's not forget, Caleb and Keelan Boone have started to put this team on their back at this point of the year.
Yeah, they had 46 combined. Well, go ahead. Talk about what Kruger was speaking on with his backup bigs, who absolutely have to come through now.
And he had mentioned, and I was actually kind of surprised to hear this and that he brought this up, was that was really the first time in a game setting that Rob Whaley and Carl Jones had played any kind of extended minutes together. And I actually was really impressed with what I saw. Normally, my biggest knock on Carl Jones is in his one-on-one post defense. He was ferocious. And he played 8 minutes. They were mean 8 minutes. And he was a physical presence down low. He commanded respect on the defensive end, which is something that UNLV A desperately needs, and B, something that he has not typically given them. And then how about Rob Whaley really starting to turn it on when he's been given the opportunity? And here's a guy who lost a ton of weight, basically transforming his entire game in the span of a year between his last year at College of Southern Idaho and here in Vegas. And now he's played more than 13 minutes in 5 straight games. He had only done that once but before this 5-game stretch, and he's done it pretty efficiently. I think he could be a little bit more efficient. And one of the things too that we had brought up early in the year, and it's one thing that I know you've been talking about with Whaley basically since the start of the year with Coach Kruger, is he wants to be a ball on the floor distributing big down low. Now that's not necessarily, at least as it's played out, been one of his strengths. But I think if we can get him to play just a little bit bigger, a little bit more traditional down low, they don't need anything crazy as far as distributing. They've got that with DJ Thomas. I think Keelan Boone has done a great job distributing as well, namely to his brother, finding him in some great spots. But they don't necessarily need another distributing big. If Whaley can play a more traditional down low game and get those efficiency numbers up, I mean, he was 2 of 6 from the field And we're talking about a great game overall. I think if he can, improve that field goal percentage, he can really be a force to be reckoned with come later conference play off the bench.
Well, Rob has to be coached. I spoke to him early in the season. I think it was on that Dayton trip, which they wound up not playing the game, which was a shame because his dad, who was a ballyhooed recruit back in the day, Robert Whaley, who was 6'9" and a load at like 260, 270. I talked to him early in the season, and he openly spoke about his mental game, his confidence. And you can see it it was waning after that canceled Dayton game. He wasn't getting a lot of playing time. And Kruger mentioned on the Kruger show last night something really important. They made an adjustment, and I think they're going to stick to it. He was playing a lot of 4, which meant that at times he was on the perimeter. He had to make decisions on the perimeter. He's 6'6", right? Maybe 6'5". With the hair, he's 6'8".
Yeah, they got him listed at 6'7". I'm not sure how much of that is hair.
But at 265, he can muscle up with anyone. I made the comment during I got to say, too, I know it's been a rough season, but if you go to the games and you watch, I had a freaking hoot the other night, and we'll get into New Mexico a little more. I had so much fun at that game watching the player battle. And before that, the San Diego State game, the couple of minutes that Rob Whaley and Jaden Ledee were going at it, I made the comparison like, this is like Jonathan Ogden and Simeon Rice, like on the floor playing basketball, like trying to jockey for it. Like they're just massive, muscled up human beings. But Kruger mentioned they're going to play him mostly at the 5, and he's got plenty of size to do that. And I love undersized 5s. And in this case, he's 6'5", 6'6", but he also jumps like he's 6'1". So his shot blocking ability is great. He can finish around the basket. I think he's got to be a little stronger and going straight up and basically putting his head through someone else's dome and drawing fouls and maybe finishing. But the key with him is the more he plays, the more positives he sees on the floor, I think the better he's going to be. And he can be that force that I think the staff thought he could be in the paint.
And only because you probably have an answer to this that I don't, what is the status on Isaiah Cottrell?
I think it's going to be.
Do we know?
It's going to be touch and go the rest of the year. It's a foot. It's not the same foot that kept him out all of last year. He's also dealing with a shoulder. If you've noticed about the last 6 games, he's wearing a big harness on a shoulder. So I think it's going to be a game-to-game thing. And honestly, with Ice, if Ice would play more like Rob Whaley does at his most aggressive moments, then Isaiah Cottrell would be super valuable. There are just times where, like a good example, he only played 3 minutes, and maybe it was the foot, but I think he only played 3 minutes against San Diego State because you saw him go against Ledee, and he just wasn't strong enough. He wasn't, and against San Diego State, you got to freaking lock onto the ball. You can't be loose with the ball. So I still think Cottrell can be a valuable contributor, but he's got to be more consistent, and he's got to bring more physicality to the floor.
And the reason I ask is because this upcoming game against Utah State, this Aggie team that's been one of the top 2 or 3 biggest surprises in all of college basketball, really, really front court heavy. So it's kind of an exact inverse of what we saw from New Mexico, who's really led by their guard play around the outside. I thought it was interesting to hear Kevin Kruger talk about just the matchups and the issues that this Utah State team presents. But I think that if Rob Whaley can play at his best, this is a matchup that is made for him. Me personally, I would like to see him more at the 4. Now, out of necessity, they kind of are going to have to split his minutes between the 4 and the 5. I think in this kind of team, in this system, I think he would be a phenomenal 4 because he's not going to try to stretch it. He's not going to be outside. If you can go with him and Caleb Boone together on the floor for any kind of extended minutes, I think that it gives you a little bit more physicality down low, and B, let Whaley distribute. He can just give it to Boone, get his assist that way. But I think we are going to see some interesting rotations moving throughout, and that's kind of something that Coach Kruger alluded to last night.
So we go back to New Mexico for a second for this. So you mentioned Jalen House got himself out of sorts because he was going a billion miles an hour, and I thought early he was kind of screwing with DJ Thomas, and it was affecting DJ. I think DJ got caught making a pass and jump travel because he was all over him, and he was talking tons of trash. But it's funny. We talked to Jeff Grammer, longtime writer around the Mountain West Conference, knows his basketball, covers New Mexico, and he went out of his way to point out that Deion Thomas is the one who kind of screwed up Jalen House because after a while, Jalen couldn't speed up the game because Deion wouldn't let him. And he thought that Jalen House got a little frustrated because Deion just stayed at a pace, his pace, and under control.
That's been the most impressive thing to me about D-Don Thomas Jr. this year is that he, at least after the first couple of games, once he got his feet wet, once he figured out who he was and his role on this team, the level-headedness has been just so interesting to watch, especially when you consider that he's a true freshman barely at 18 years old. Now, if you were seeing this from, a 23-year-old, fifth or sixth year guy, that's one thing, that's expected. But this kid he should be a senior in high school. That's the point that everybody brings up. And it's just remarkable that when he has allowed himself to not get sped up, he has the entire court at his disposal. And the vision, I was sitting right behind the broadcast position in that first row behind Gucci Road during the last game. And I would try to see kind of what he was looking at and what he was looking for. And the vision and the passes that he was making through traffic were really, really impressive, especially for a true freshman.
Hey, he was good again. And from a defensive standpoint, you can't get two more different matchups than a guy who's super fast and harassing you, but maybe not that physical and he bumps a lot, but it's not the same impact with Jalen House, who dripping wet is probably 180 pounds. The physicality, and again, I'm always impressed, whatever unit it is each year, I'm always impressed with the physicality and the kind of defense that San Diego State plays. Lamont Butler's a big guy. I mean, he's 6'2" and probably 210 pounds, older guy. I don't think I realized how physical Darren Trammell is. He's only 5'10", but he's a thick 185, 190, and like really physical, really handsy, knocking defenders' arms away, bumping, grabbing hips on defense. So he went from that, getting mauled, to then having a guy like running circles around him. It was so funny, DJ's mentality, because he's always calm. He's never demonstrative. You don't really see him react much, even when he makes shots, makes big plays. Late in the game, House was just going crazy. He was Tasmanian Devil, and he did something coming down the floor where there was some kind of foul or something, and he ran by right in front of D-Don and said something. And I swear D-Don gave him one of these looks, and he actually made a gesture. He's like, it's like, this guy is crazy. But it never affected him. It never affected him. Man, he's impressive.
It was funny to watch House turn his attention to Luis Rodriguez towards the end. And that was interesting. Kind of baited the tech out of Luis. I was sitting right there.
How did he do it?
All that I saw was that he was guarding him on an inbound play, and he kind of was in his face and, talking little as he does. And then once Luis kind of got into him a little bit, I swear to God, he just started screaming Luis over and over again in his face. And I'm sitting there. I'm sitting with TC Martin, longtime Las Vegas radio personality, and we're sitting there and we looked at each other. We're like, "Is this guy serious?" And he baited the tech out of Luis Rodriguez, and afterwards, anytime a guy gets a tech, what did I do? When Luis went over to the ref, I could tell he genuinely didn't know what he did to get that tech called on him, and that's part of Jalen House's game. But I was really impressed later in that game that UNLV didn't let that really get them and impact them at all.
We haven't talked about the Boone twins, but tremendous game. 46 combined. On Keelan, just be patient. Just let the ball move. Kruger said it last night on the radio show. He talked about the importance of passing the ball and being set for the shot, but he was pretty critical. He's like those first 3 threes, they had no shot. And I know one of them he slammed off the backboard, but and Keelan said it after the game. He's like, I so appreciate my teammates for allowing me the time to adjust, because don't forget, he wasn't with the team. This is a recent thing, and then the lineup has changed. And I think, as you pointed out, and we'll point it out again, Keelan didn't really have any active playing time with DJ Thomas, so he's learning the freshman, and the freshman's learning him.
And it was that was something that Coach Kruger said yesterday as well. And I think that if he didn't have as much experience coming into this year as he has, it'd be a totally different scenario. And the plug and play nature of what Keelan Boone has done, playing in basically 30 minutes in every game since being activated in the middle of the season, just like that, just from a physical perspective, is really, really impressive to go from 0 to 100 like that. And you could tell on the road trips when he was not deemed eligible yet, and at the practices and pregame and stuff. He was chomping at the bit. And I can only imagine, especially given the circumstance of him coming here to play with his brother, who was immediately eligible, he just wanted to play. So it is not surprising to see him go from 0 to 100. It is surprising, and we knew he was a pretty good shooter, especially from range. I mean, some of the three-point makes, he knows it's in as soon as it leaves his hand. And teams are going to have to start respecting that, because especially late in that game when the Boons really took over, he had some wide open looks, especially from the elbow.
Well, think about the possibilities on offense. You got a guy who can go anywhere on the floor, distribute to anyone, break down almost any guard in the country in D-Don. Then you've got the possibility of having Caleb Boone on the post and his brother Keelan on the same side with a pitch and catch possibility. Hey, you want a double from the weak side on the big when he gets the ball? Okay, now the weak side's open. You want to have the defender slip down a little bit from Keelan. Well, if he pitches it back out and Keelan's square, now he's got the three ball. So things are coming together. But here's the thing. I don't want to get too excited because a lot of this is up to Caleb. He's just got to be more consistent and more aggressive. And he said it. I was not a presence against San Diego State. He has to be a presence in every single game. Even Richard Pitino told Grammer after the game that they just hadn't seen Caleb Boone in the post consistently do that. We saw him do it against Kalkbrenner and Creighton, but he's been so inconsistent that he wasn't on the top of the scout sheet, and he will be 1 or 2 on every scout sheet the rest of the way.
As he should be. And I think it'll be really interesting, especially coming off this performance, to see how Utah State kind of tries to mitigate that damage. And we'll see if they do the double, because like you said, I really like that look of the Boons on the same side going back and forth. You can't double both of them. So someone's going to be open, and they've got such great communication. You know, they've got that twin telekinesis going on, and they are just so fluid together. And we're starting to see it more and more as they get more and more minutes together.
Want to mention, you got to go up and hit friends of UNLV.com. They've got a $150,000 half-court madness contest. This is one of the outfits that is trying to put together more and more funding for NIL, for men's basketball, women's basketball, football, other sports, help UNLV athletics. And this is a chance. You know, everyone out there is like, oh, what does UNLV have NIL? They're smart asses in the market. Like, they have no money. Contribute. You can do your part. Right? I don't want to be this crass about it, but you can contribute to retaining players and buying players. That's the system now. And it's not all up to Bill Paulus to give all the money, or the Boyd family to give all the money. Now they've set up something, partnering with the Palms, where if you donate $25, $50, or $100, you get all that money back in either gaming credit, or, for me, the most important one is food credit. So you help the effort and you get something back for it. Essentially, to me, it's free. So get involved. Again, friends of you, NILV.com. You can read up on the details. And this is a place where people have a big passion. This system is now above board. So you can contribute and help, again, keep players, retain players, and get players, and help out the athletes. Do it. This is a great thing.
Well, and we saw a direct example of a system like this that was put in place by a bigger university that led to a national championship. Remember, Blake Corum of Michigan was debating whether or not to go to the NFL draft after last season. A disappointing ending for what he wanted, a national championship. It was a Michigan collective. And again, that's a completely different scale. You can't necessarily compare the two, but the system is the exact same, just on a newer scale here at UNLV. Blake Corum gets the I'll say donation, gets, he gets the money from exactly what we're talking about. He goes back, has a phenomenal year. They go undefeated. They win all 15 games and are national champions. So it has a direct impact, and we're starting to see it at the, major upper echelon, and it's kind of working its way up through D1 as a whole.
And this is all a win-win, because not only are you directly, with a small donation, taking part in NIL to help, say, the Running Rebels, because the Palms is involved. If this is active enough and they get to the $100,000 goal, which would basically be 4,000 people in a market of 2.3 million donate $25 a piece, you're also trying to keep up with the Joneses. So here's the deal around the Mountain West Conference. Believe it or not, UNLV, which used to be a powerhouse in terms of funding behind the scenes, and you were doing it illegally, right? We know that, but so are lots of other schools. And I believe, there are schools that have purchased their way to the table in the last 15 years, mid-majors. They didn't just do it out of, a miracle. They started competing, like Gonzaga started competing with Arizona when they got funding. Wichita State had its run because of the Koch brothers. I don't know where the Butler money came from, and I assume they had some to compete. But in this conference,
it's got to be from the royalties from Hoosiers, I guess.
Right? In this conference, the NIL kings are right now San Diego State, New Mexico, and Boise. And New Mexico it hasn't worked out with the money they've spent. But from what I'm told, everyone on that roster has some piece of NIL. Every single player gets something. That's great. And New Mexico, listen, it came down to, with Morris Udeze, a pretty good competition around the Mountain West Conference about who could give him the best deal, and he landed at New Mexico. San Diego State is weird because they have NIL, and a lot of their players are rewarded, and a lot of it's the retention stuff. And with Keyshawn Johnson, I think they just got outbid. You can't compete with Arizona, so they lost him.
Yeah.
But they've kept the team together over the years because of NIL, and that's why they have guys who stay 5 and sometimes freaking 6 years. Now, the flip side of that is San Diego State will whine about New Mexico. They'll feed their one writer who's kind of at their beck and call, and then he'll go out and rip other schools. Oh, San Diego State can't compete on that. But the other one to mention is, and it's nothing against them, Boise really has it together. They were in front of the game with a group of 5s on getting NIL together, and that's a reason they're doing really well in the football transfer portal. They got Malachi Nelson. My guess is, Matt, that they're so good with NIL that they actually fed the media there behind the scenes, because I saw this whole vibe when Malachi Nelson, the former 5-star, committed to Boise State. There were a couple of writers who immediately went up and they're like, NIL was not the most important thing. Like, why would you write that? I mean, that's a little bit of PR, but basketball has had NIL for a while. Like, they got Marcus Shaver back last year, and when he pulled his name, out of potential NBA works draft and all that, like, they announced a deal and the client and the sponsor. So they're really good at it. And for UNLV to operate on that level, the community has to get more into this. And I think the other big positive is, because the Palms is involved, the casino involvement is tough because there's optics there. If they gave directly to NIL, then all of a sudden, there's maybe some gaming concerns and, the amateurism and college athletes. This is a way to do it that works. And if it works for the Palms, guess what's going to happen? Then they can go to other casinos and go, look, it worked for the Palms. We've got this for you. So now you can get involved money-wise and help the community. So this can all build. And it has to. In this landscape of college basketball, it has to.
And, nothing against the Palms, because this is a great thing that they've done. And like you said, I think it's the start of them trying to get, other casino groups. But in terms of the big fish, in terms of Las Vegas casinos, the Palms is at the bottom. So if you can work your way up, and it really is going to be successful for the Palms, who did a great job with the renovation. It's one of my favorite properties because that's the only one on my side of Flamingo from the Strip. You go out there and you can get Caesars, you get MGM. All of a sudden, you're talking that Blake Corum, Michigan type of money that can be involved, and especially for the old school Vegas people that are involved in the management of a lot of these places. I mean, as everybody knows, the Tark days in the 90s, people would go to UNLV games over Lakers games, the celebrities, when they had the options. So there is a market, and it is still there. The sports landscape has been diluted in Vegas just with the additions of all these new teams and the major teams starting to come to town. But it is, at the end of the day, still a UNLV basketball town when they are really good. And if you can drum up the support, help them retain players, help them get an upper echelon of players like we're starting to see in football, there's no reason why, you can't be a top team in the Mountain West on and off the court, involving NIL for years and years and years.
Matt, great job. Listen for us on Saturday, 11:30 with Running Rebel warm-up, and then apparently a great Utah State team, a completely new roster. Man, Danny Sprinkle is the runaway favorite for Mountain West Conference Coach of the Year. Utah State comes in. They are high-powered on offense. They play good defense. This is a really important game to win, and the tip is at noon. So we hope, if you don't go to the game, and you should, because, by the way, that's another thing that builds upon itself. And I'll say bluntly, if you want DJ Thomas to give UNLV year 2, 3, and 4, start showing up. Because if I were a player and I looked up, and the crowd gets loud, that's there, but more people need to show up. And this UNLV team with home crowd support, I think, can really do a good job with the Mountain West Conference slate. So
definitely. And I mean, so this is obviously a home game. Then they go on the road next week, Boise State and Colorado. They're staying out there in between games. So this is a really important game for them to win with two of the top teams, if not the two top teams in the conference coming up. But I did want to make one note, Steve, before we head out, that after this stretch of 5 games to start the year, San Diego State, New Mexico, Utah State, Colorado State, Boise State, the top 5 teams in the conference for all intents and purposes, they then play Air Force, San Jose State, Fresno State, and Wyoming. Those 4 combined right now are 1-9 in conference play. So you've got an opportunity where if you can steal, 2 of these next 3 games and start your conference slate out 3-2 against the top of the class of the Mountain West, you've got a really great opportunity to take advantage of at least 3 of those next 4 games. And you're stealing 6 out of your first, 8 or 9 games in conference play. That is phenomenal given how the non-conference slate came to a close.